It is 7 o'clock and we have a quorum, so I am going to call this meeting to order. This is the second session of Special Town Meeting 3 being held on October 7th. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Indigenous Peoples Day is coming up on Monday. Also, I am not sure that last night I adequately thanked at all Marissa Vogt, who created that incredibly complex and incredibly helpful sort of decision tree that was used in determining how to vote on Article 1. The only item today is Article 2. Article 2 requests appropriation of funding to provide fossil-free fuel ground source heat pumps to Driscoll. The amount would be in $4.9 million, and it is anticipated that it would be bonded. It is being moved by Mr. Sandman, seconded by Mr. Gashak, and it can be found on the combined reports pages 2 through 4. All right, so we're going to jump right in. And I am going to call on Mr. Gashak, who has up to 10 minutes, excuse me. We're having some technical difficulties, so hold on just a couple of minutes. Up in the future. David Gashak.
There we go.
Hello.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Could I have my slides brought up, please? Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. Dave Gashak, Precinct 13, and I'm going to do a quick version of asking you to vote yes for re-adding ground source heat pumps to Driscoll School. And then, like I said, we're going to try to keep this quick, but happy to go back through and answer questions if members have them later. Next slide, please. So the basic version of what we're asking to do here is why we should vote yes on this article. And it comes down to this. For an added investment of $4.8 million up front, so that's 4.8 on top of the 115.5 that town meeting has already authorized for this project, we can re-add ground source heat pumps back to the project and replace air source heat pumps, which are the base bid right now. And there's some backstory there that I'll get into in a second. Making this change, it would be projected to cut the building's electricity consumption by 25% each year and cut its monthly demand by up to 87%. And we'll get into more detail as to how that's calculated and why that's important. Bottom line, this is expected to pay for itself and more over the building's useful lifespan. And now's our really only chance to make this investment. Next slide, please. So what's a ground source heat pump? So as we know, it gets pretty cold here in the winter, it gets pretty hot here and increasingly so in the summer. Air source heat pumps, like are currently in the base Driscoll bid, try to draw heat, and they do draw heat from that cold winter air to help heat the building. And they sink heat into that hot summer air to help cool the building. But ground source heat pumps, which is what we're proposing to change back to here, do the same thing, but doing it from 900 feet underground where the temperature is a constant approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year. So it's much easier and more efficient to heat from and cool into that source than it is into the air. Next slide, please. So the upfront investment is just under $4.8 million. This is all in hard costs and soft costs, and builds in some contingency as well. Next slide, please. For that investment, we get a economic payback as well as a climate payback. So the economic payback comes in the form of a little bit in lower maintenance costs. It's a little simpler and easier to maintain system. A larger amount in projected capital repair and replacement costs. And then a really large amount in terms of projected electricity cost savings over the course of the life of the building. We also, as part of that, because we'd be using less electricity, we're less exposed to the risk of the price of electricity going up over time. As put here, the price risk on electricity that we have not purchased is eliminated altogether. There's also a chance that on top of all this, it adds a revenue stream from the sale of alternative energy certificates, but we're not factoring that into the calculations tonight. That would just be icing on the cake. Next slide, please. So who ran the numbers that you're about to see? Mostly the project team, GG&D consulting engineers, along with the architect and project manager and others. Thank you to Deputy Town Administrator Melissa Goff for providing the bond financing schedule that you'll see. And then a huge thanks to Scott Englander, who's going to speak in a little bit from Precinct 6, who helped refine the electricity cost and savings analysis that really moved this forward. And this is what Scott does for a living, so that's why he knows this stuff so well. Next slide, please. So this is a projected difference in annual electricity demand, and so consumption and demand. In each of the blue and red areas, you see a base column, which is the current base air source heat pump system and what that would be expected to require in terms of energy consumption or electricity consumption and electricity demand over the course of a year. In each of them, you'll see a middle column, which is the ground source system that we're asking to change back to. And then you see a savings, which is the delta between the two. And so over the course of each year, if you look down at the bottom line, you see on the consumption side, we're talking about 25% less, a little over 300,000 fewer kilowatt hours per year. On the demand side, it's even bigger because it's far less spiky in terms of its demand to go to ground source versus air source. We're talking about savings of up to 87% of the peak kilowatt demand, depending on the month. And so back of the rough calculation at today's emission rates, it's in the ballpark of 100 metric tons of CO2 emissions per year saved by making this change. Next slide, please. This is a graphic illustration of the base bid at the top, what the electricity would cost with the air source heat pump system we project and the project team projects. And then down at the bottom, you see the comparison over the same time period to the cost of electricity if we make this switch to geothermal, both lower and flatter across the year. Next slide, please. And this is the projected electricity cost savings one versus the other for ground source heat pumps over a year. You can see the way that the electricity usage is projected in the model for the building. We use a lot of it over the course of the school year. We don't do a lot of cooling in this model over the course of the summer. So the savings are really in the winter. As we need more and more cooling in town, if we use this building more and more for summer cooling, like a cooling center, which we don't have right now at any size, then we'd get some more savings in the summer as well as what you see here in the winter. Next slide, please. So here are the numbers. You see a project year in the left-hand column, years 1 through, to use 75 as an approximate useful building life. It may be, the current Driscoll's over 100, so we could get even more than that. You see a bond debt service schedule in the next column. This is assuming 3% interest on the bond. We're probably going to be able to borrow it less than that. So this is a little bit conservative in that sense. And you see it starts at about $384,000 in year 1, drops to just under $250,000 by year 20 when the bond's paid off. What you see in the next column, the total annual projected savings, is the sum total of the maintenance and the capital repair replacement and the electricity cost savings by year. And as you can see, for the first year or two, it's zero because the building's not really operating yet. Once we get to year 3, we start to almost completely offset that debt service immediately. By about year 7, we're net positive. We're actually saving more than we're paying on the debt service at that general ballpark. By year 20, at the end of the bond, we're net positive by a couple $100,000. And then once the debt service stops, it jumps up to net positive by $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, even more. So you see over in those right-hand columns, a cumulative budget impact that gets up to $70 million over 75 years, non-discounted. When you discount it to present value, using, in this case, a 3% discount rate, it's about $15 million, meaning that's including all that we've paid. That's the 4.8 factored against the total savings. We're net in the black or in the green, however you want to call it, by about $15 million in present value terms. Next slide, please. And this is a graphical representation of the same thing. We start by paying money. We quite quickly start offsetting that by saving money. And then once we get past year 20, we're purely saving money on this system for the rest of its useful life. Next slide, please. How we're going to pay the debt service under the AC's motion, in which we all join, including a unanimous select board, the petitioners and unanimous school committee supports it, and others. Hopefully, we're going to go out. The first thing we're going to do is going to go out and ask the Department of Revenue to approve that this can fall under the existing December 2019 debt exclusion vote. If that doesn't work, if we don't get that approval for any reason, then the backup would be it would come out of annual operating budget or CIP on a given year. But as you saw before, the cost savings on the operating side will quite quickly come in to mostly and then entirely offset this cost. And then it's also possible that there'll be further federal infrastructure dollars that aren't currently in play, but may become available that could qualify to be used here too, but we're not relying on that. Next slide, please. And I just want to stress that the change will not hinder project completion per the project team. Next slide, please. Major climate pickup, I've already said, and Scott Englander and Lisa Cunningham and Jesse Gray and others are going to get into that. Next slide, please. Want to just quickly say the reason why this is not a bait and switch ploy, as you may have heard from some folks in the lead up to the meeting. This was basically cut as part of value engineering in good faith, based upon some mistaken projections of electricity savings and payback. Now that the savings analysis has been corrected, we're asking to put it back in, and we can. So, and with that, I'll wrap up and say, please join me in voting yes on the main motion. It's both green in the sense of making money for the town over the long term, and green in the sense of reducing our carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gashak. Due to the complexity, we did go a little over, but it's the only thing on the docket tonight, so I don't think that'll be a problem. Carol Levin for the advisory committee will have 12 minutes.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a question from Gil Hoy. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, I'm sorry. My question was answered.
Okay, thank you very much. Eileen Berger? Eileen Berger, you have a question?
I was wondering what the impact of the financial impact would be in relation to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please introduce yourself.
I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not used to this. Eileen Berger, Precinct 15. I was just wondering what the financial situation would be in relation to the bonding for and payment for the $11 million we voted on the other night to this project. Does it impact it in any way, or is it totally separate?
Melissa Gill? Goff, geez. Okay, you must, Melissa Goff, I apologize. I keep doing that.
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. So this is a separate project from the authorization that was voted last night. So this would add additional funding to our debt service schedule. So the estimates are provided in the advisory committee report. And I think Carol also has a presentation that articulates the impact of this project.
Thank you. If you continue to have a question, let's just see if the future presentations answer those. And we will get to Carol Levin from the advisory committee now. And please introduce yourself.
Carol Levin, at-large member of the advisory committee. We're here tonight to consider whether to invest $4.9 million to restore the ground source heat pumps to the Driscoll School project, with the goal of reducing the school's carbon footprint further as compared to the air source heat pumps currently planned, which are also fossil fuel free. We're all in agreement about the importance of addressing climate change. That's not the matter under consideration this evening. The AC's questions and concerns are focused on 3 areas. The first is, does this investment make sense in the context of the Driscoll School project? The second, is this proposal the best and most effective use of the town's finite resources in meeting its climate goals? And the third is, what is the financial impact on the town of proceeding? How are we going to pay for this? Given the very accelerated time frame that we had to review this warrant article, the petitioners must be commended for their efforts to respond to all of the AC's questions. Thanks further to the extraordinary efforts of AC member John Doggett, we were able to become comfortable with the petitioners' financial projections and accept their basic conclusions, though we were not able to totally verify their assumptions and data. We accept the conclusion of an approximately 21-year payback for this program, and at least in the early years that we would be avoiding approximately 100 metric tons of carbon annually. On the question of whether spending this $4.9 million on the Driscoll School geothermal project is the most effective or best way of achieving the town's climate goals, we do not have an answer. To properly answer that question would require a defined method of analysis with specific metrics and benchmarks, allowing us to compare alternative investments. Brookline does not have such an approach in place. We do know that there are many important investments waiting to be made in Brookline, which will be necessary to minimize the town's carbon footprint. These investments include, but are not limited to, the electrification of other town buildings, electrifying the town fleet, including purchasing or renting electric school buses, reducing energy usage in town facilities via weatherization and the installation of new windows, increasing our investment in parks and our urban forests, accelerating the town's purchase of renewable energy, strengthening and upgrading our stormwater infrastructure, and potentially establishing things like a revolving loan fund to support our local businesses' efficiency efforts. All of these are important uses of the town's funds. How are we to compare them? How do we prioritize them? We do know for a fact that if we want to install geothermal wells at the new Driscoll School, it needs to be done now as part of the initial construction process. This is not something that we can do in future years. So we couldn't answer that second question, and we turned our attention to the third. What is the financial impact of proceeding, and how are we going to pay for this? The town must make a commitment to purchase the necessary equipment by October 12th, a decision which cannot be delayed past that time without delaying the opening of the school, an outcome with its own financial and educational consequences. This October 12th deadline means the town is in a very unusual situation, committing to spend $4.9 million before we know how we will pay for it. Geothermal wells were an original part of the Driscoll School design. They were removed in the spring of 2020 as part of the value engineering process as an attempt to keep the project within its original budget. This past summer, in response to early information about the potential ability to use ARPA funds for sustainability projects, discussions about restoring the geothermal wells to the project resumed. That portion of the project was rebid, and the cost is now increased from approximately $2.4 million to $4.9 million, which is the delta over the cost of the air source heat pumps. The permissibility of using ARPA funds for this purpose is no longer clear, and in addition, the town's own process for using for determining the use of ARPA funds is not compatible with the Driscoll project's timeline. Warrant Article 2 will require the town to ask the State Department of Revenue to increase the Driscoll authorization so that the geothermal heat pumps can be financed through the Driscoll School debt exclusion. You may recall that the town made a similar request of DOR in connection with the Brookline High School project. The difference in these two cases is that no funds were committed by the town prior to the DOR approval for BHS. If town meeting tonight votes yes on warrant Article 2, we are committing to this expenditure without knowing DOR's decision. So what happens if DOR says no? If DOR denies our request, the $4.9 million will come out of the town's CIP. The CIP is not an unlimited pot of money, unfortunately, and placing this project into the CIP will mean the postponement or infinite delay of other capital investment projects, a list of which was included in Town Administrator Mel Klechter's memo on warrant Article 1. In an attempt to clarify for town meeting the impact on the CIP, we've prepared the following slides in an attempt to explain how the CIP is funded and the constraints on its size. Could we please have the slides? Thank you. The town has very specific policies regarding the funding of the CIP. Each year, the CIP is set at 7.5% of the previous fiscal year's net revenues. So for fiscal year 23, it will be set at 7.5% of fiscal year 22's net revenues, which are estimated at $290 million. The net revenues exclude one-time and restricted use revenues of approximately $40 million. This $21.5 million is funded in two ways. Approximately $17.4 million will come from general fund revenues, and the balance will come from free cash. The amount of general fund revenues used is also set by town financial policies at 6% of the previous fiscal year's net revenues. So in order for the town to increase its CIP funding, we would need to reduce our operating expenditures elsewhere. Next slide, please. The $17.4 million in current year operating revenues are allocated between debt service, which is here originally projected prior to warrant Article 1 at $14.6 million. All non-debt excluded and non-enterprise fund debt goes through the CIP. This $14.6 million includes approximately $800,000 of new debt service being incurred for projects in the fiscal year 23 CIP, which we've already committed to. Next slide, please.
All right, I'm sorry to insult you, but this is extremely complicated. How much more time do you think you'll need?
I think there's probably 4 more slides.
Okay, let's talk quickly.
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. The other use of this funds is into the cash funded portion of the CIP. Here shown is $2.7 million. So these two portions, the debt service and the tax funded, equal the $17.4 million. Next slide. The debt service portion and the cash funded portion plus the money coming from free cash is how we get to $21.5 million. Next slide. As a result of warrant Article 1, debt service in the amount of $1.375 million will need to be paid in the CIP. That amount of money will be reallocated from the cash portion of the CIP to the debt service portion. Next slide. If warrant Article 2 needs to be funded through the CIP, an additional $360,000 will be transferred from the tax-funded portion of the CIP into the debt service account. Next slide. That will leave us with approximately $5.1 million to pay for the cash-funded CIP projects. Cash-funded CIP projects primarily consist of sidewalk, road improvements, tree planting, and include in this coming year $380,000 for sidewalks, $436,000 for the Beacon Street bike path, $100,000 for energy conservation, and things of that size and nature. The preliminary CIP for fiscal year 23 has almost $7 million already listed for cash investments. And this excludes any new initiatives that might be raised by department heads as part of the fiscal year 23 planning.
I'm sorry, Ms. Levin, you need to finish.
This is the last slide. We will have
Okay.
we will have a shortfall going forward of approximately $1.8 million. So, in conclusion, the AC and town meeting will need to make difficult choices in the years ahead if this project does hit the CIP. The advisory committee's vote on this warrant article occurred prior to the decision on warrant Article 1, and there was insufficient time to post an AC meeting between the warrant Article 1 vote and tonight's meeting to give the AC an opportunity to reconsider its recommendation. On September 23rd, the AC voted by a vote of 24-1-0 favorable action on warrant Article 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hold off on the questions because it's quite possible that answers will come up in speakers' upcoming presentations. So I'm going to hold off for a while on those. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Harry Friedman, Precinct 12, member of the Advisory Committee, but only speaking for a small minority of the Advisory Committee, a very small minority, actually a minority of one. We are asked to appropriate tonight an additional $4.9 million to install a fossil-free HVAC system using geothermal, despite the fact that the system it would replace is also fossil-free, a greener than green system. Is it worth it? In a perfect world, yes. In a world in which ugly concepts like money are not factors, definitely worth it. Many in Brookline seem to think we live in such a world. Sadly, we do not. This amount, as Carol stated, will be bonded. If the state allows us to do that, it will get added to everyone's tax bill as part of the Driscoll debt exclusion once that project hits the tax bills. If the state balks, the bond payments will come out of the CIP, thus affecting other capital projects we may have funded in its stead. Let's review what we've done over the past 3 years. In 2018, we approved an override in the amount of $206 million for the high school. In 2020, we needed to approve an additional $32 million for cost overruns at the high school. In December 2019, we approved a $115 million Driscoll override. We are now being asked to approve an additional $4.9 million for the Driscoll. This past spring, we approved a 1% property tax surcharge for the Community Preservation Act. 2 nights ago, we approved an $11 million legal settlement. We face a $50 million backlog in road repairs. We have an $18 million backlog in school building repairs and maintenance. If we ever choose to rebuild the Davis Path footbridge, that is estimated between 13 and 16 million. We have fire department personnel living in close proximity to exhaust fumes from where the fire trucks are located. A rebuild of the Babcock Street Station is estimated at 40 million. And the rebuilt Pierce School is currently estimated at 140 million net of state aid. Town meeting has backed all of the past projects and tax increases and will probably back most, if not all, of the future projects. Many here argue for affordability, yet we are facing a future where only the very rich and the very poor will be able to live here because of this lack of concern over ever-increasing property taxes. Where will we be standing when the music stops? When whatever hits the fan hits the fan? What special project of yours will be the one that the voters finally refuse to fund because it will be the straw that breaks the camel's back? The geothermal project is a great one, but no serious attempt was made to find 4.9 million worth of cuts elsewhere in the Driscoll project in order to fund this particular improvement. The concept of fiscal responsibility has to regain a place in our decision-making. We have to stop thinking of each project as one small independent piece and look at the bigger picture. We are going down a dangerous road. I ask you to join me and many others. Well, I ask you to join me and some others. Actually, I ask you to join me in voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. I now call on Select Chair Heather Hamilton. You have
Thank you.
3 or 4 minutes, whatever.
Trust me, I won't need that. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Heather Hamilton for a unanimous select board recommending favorable action on warrant Article 2. We are pleased the petitioners and the advisory committee could reach agreement on the final language. Please vote favorable action.
Very succinct. Thank you very much. Mr. Van Scoyoc. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of the town meeting members tonight. I'm a person who likes to deliver news, and so I'm going to present my remarks in the form of news headlines. Headline number 1, climate change, huge threat to humanity. Physics Nobel winner Parisi says. Italian physics Nobel Prize winner Giorgio Parisi told reporters on Tuesday, I think it is very urgent that we take real and very strong decisions and we move at a very strong pace. It is just that people are not willing to accept the fact that they have to react now for something that will happen in a few years, he said. Fun fact, former US Vice President Al Gore and the UN Climate Panel received the Peace Prize in 2007 for their warning about climate change 14 years ago. William Nordhaus won 1/2 of the 2018 Economics Prize for integrating climate change into the Western economic growth model. Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg is also seen as a strong contender for this year's Peace Prize, due to be announced from Oslo on Friday. My editorial comment, lots of awards being handed out to those who are sounding the alarm about climate change, but the real reward would be if the rest of us do something about it. Headline number 2, climate change is the greatest threat to public health, top medical journals warn. More than 200 medical journals are warning in an unprecedented joint statement that urges the world's leaders to cut heat trapping emissions to avoid, quote, catastrophic harm to health that will be impossible to reverse, end quote. The editorial, which was published in leading journals such as The Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the British Medical Journal, says the world can't wait for the COVID-19 pandemic to pass before addressing climate change. No temperature rise is safe, the editorial says. In the past 20 years, heat-related mortality among people over 65 years of age has increased by more than 50%. And as if to prove the point, the LA Times today has an investigative report on the undercounting of heat-related deaths. Quote, extreme heat is one of the deadliest consequences of global warming. But in a state that prides itself as a climate leader, California chronically undercounts the death toll and has failed to address the growing threat of heat-related illness and death. More
You have one
headlines.
more minute.
Climate change poses an existential threat to outdoor recreation. Ancient sequoias face existential threat from wildfires, climate change. Dry summer emphasizes threat of climate change to Yellowstone National Park. Climate change threatens Egypt's Red Sea as corals fade due to warm oceans. Climate change threatens the Everglades, Florida's gem, and on and on. The world so clearly needs to do a U-turn where fossil fuels are concerned. It will require all of us to hit the brakes hard, hang on tightly, and be prepared to do things in entirely new ways. In closing, we owe thanks to the school department's Matt Gillis, the building department's Dan Bennett, Charlie Simmons, and Tony Quigley, the Driscoll School Building Committee, the school committee, with special thanks to Helen Charlupsky and Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, also John Harris and Climate Action Brookline, Lisa Cunningham, Scott Ananian, Dave Gashak, Scott Englander, Jesse Gray, Andrew Fisher, and other climate activists too numerous to mention. Thank you for listening. Please vote yes on Article 2.
Thank you very much. Marissa Vogt. VOGT
Hi.
and company.
Hi, my name is Marissa Vogt. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 4. It's bedtime here, so the kids are babbling a little, sorry. I have a short question. The combined reports quote dollar amounts for the initial impact of the 20-year principal payment structure on the median single-family condo and commercial property taxes. And I was wondering, what is the expected financial impact on the median property taxes for residential rental units? I can understand that the impact on renters is a complicated question, since landlords may or may not choose to pass on their costs to their tenants. But I think it's important to try to get a rough estimate here of the impact, since renters represent about half of Brookline residents. So if somebody could give the expected impact on the median property tax change for per residential rental unit, that would be great. Thank you.
Melissa Goff, would you like to handle this one or pass it to somebody else?
Sure, Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. The numbers that were in the advisory committee report were based on level principal declining interest, but if we were using the debt exclusion, it would be a level payment situation. So I'm just going to give you some updated numbers based on that. So the impact on the levy and tax bills would be a 0.12% increase. So for a median single family owner occupied, it would be $18.33. For a median condominium, it would be $5.39. And then for a median residential rental property, it would be $40.57.
Okay, thank you. Going to call on Mr. Jesse Gray.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. This is Jesse Gray from Precinct 10, Town Meeting Member. And if I could have the slides, which are shared between Lisa Cunningham and myself. While the slides are coming up, this project is a once in 100-year opportunity that pays for itself and will benefit the town over the life of the building, 80 to 100 years. So thanks again to the Select Board, the Green Caucus, the School Committee, and a unanimous advisory committee, excepting one, albeit very important member, for their support. After hearing the previous comments, I just want to clarify that and emphasize that amidst all the details of how we will finance this project over the next several years, what hasn't been emphasized enough is that this project pays for itself, akin to a mortgage whose monthly payment is covered in large part by the rent paid by a tenant. This project starts throwing off annual positive cash flow in about 8 years. And once the mortgage is paid off, it nets the town $1 million every 3 years. The definition, so we can't afford not to do this project for our future financial health of the town. Now, and it's a case where we have to spend a little money now to make a lot of money later. Now, I want to also talk about how this fits into our plan. And the definition of insanity, it's been said, is to do the same thing again and again and expect a different result. So what do we actually need to do differently to bring our climate under control? This is part of a continuing journey where we all learn together what we have to do differently. If I could have the next slide. It's actually not that complicated. We need to do three major things. One, we need to electrify everything. So anything that burns fossil fuels, whether it's a lawnmower, a car, a dryer, a boiler, a furnace, we need to replace it with an electric appliance. Second, we need to reduce the load on our electrical grid, because the more we reduce the load, the less we need to burn fossil fuels to make electricity. And that is the category in which this project is impactful. Third, we actually also need to green the grid. And if I could have the next slide, these are things that you can do in your everyday life through the choices you make, and that we will have to be doing as a town moving forward. The bar has gone up. Fossil fuel free is not enough. We also need to reduce the load on the grid. Okay, so here are some examples of what we need to do in each of these categories. First, on electrifying everything, we cannot afford to continue to install new fossil fuel infrastructure. You should think twice before you replace your boiler, your dryer, and your hot water heater with another fossil fuel appliance. We need instead to be putting in heat pumps, we need to be cooking with induction, and we need to be no longer buying fossil fuel cars, which will be banned by 2035, according to the Baker administration. Under reducing load, we need to air seal and insulate, and we need, whenever we can, whenever we have a 100-year opportunity, we need to install geothermal because it reduces the load by about 30%.
Mr. Gray, your time is up. So if you could conclude very quickly.
So we also need battery storage, energy efficient appliances, and we need to be installing solar and buying renewable electricity. And with that, the remaining slides are for Lisa.
Okay. No, I'm going to. There's been a call for the question. I'm not going to entertain it at this point. After Ms. Cunningham speaks, I will go to some questions that are have been raised from the chat room. Ms. Cunningham, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Good evening. My name is Lisa Cunningham. I'm a town meeting member in precinct 15. I'm also an architect, and I'm working with a team at the state level on a building electrification coalition representing a growing group of towns and cities in Massachusetts, including many of our immediate neighbors. Scientists have been telling us for decades that we need to act with urgency to avert the worst consequences of climate change. And what are we doing? Nothing. We've delayed for so long that we are now witnessing extensive harm from climate change that has already occurred around the world, including in our own backyards. Data from the conservative UN International Panel on Climate Change illustrates that in order to have a 67% probability of staying within the 1.5 degree centigrade target and to avoid, in their words, the most catastrophic effects of climate change, we must reduce our carbon emissions by 57% by the year 2030 and to zero emissions by 2040. We also know that the effects of our climate crisis are borne disproportionately by our most at-risk populations, including minorities, the poor, and the elderly. Making our buildings healthy and efficient results in immediate and demonstrable improved health outcomes, as well as advancing our climate goals. We need to stop our wasteful practices, which result in real harm to our most vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. We've heard tonight about the incredible advantages that ground source heat pumps will bring to the Driscoll School as well as to the town. It is critical not only for all our town buildings to be fossil fuel free, as we have been trying to legislate for the past few years, but also for our buildings to be as efficient as possible, which we have few means to legislate at the local level. As we transition away from fossil fuels as rapidly as possible, it is imperative to minimize our energy use and maximize our efficiency. Furthermore, every new project in our town needs to be net zero. This means combining energy efficiency with no or minimal fossil fuel use and then offsetting any emissions by using on and off-site renewable energy to account for 100% of the building's energy use. Driscoll is not there yet, but it could and needs to be, and we can add solar panels and battery storage and at the same time generate even more cost savings for the town as many other Mass municipalities are doing. This needs to be the paradigm for all construction in our town going forward. Lastly, while this project is an economic win for the town, we need to confront the fact that in order to achieve our climate goals, we will have to tackle many projects with no conventional ROIs. We're not in a position where we can choose to do just some projects or delay it until we have the perfect project or the perfect financial returns. Not everything we need to do is going to pencil out as nicely as the Driscoll ground source heat pumps or pencil out using conventional metrics. Getting to net zero means that we have to actually do everything. We face an unprecedented crisis, and we need to address this crisis with all the tools and urgency that we possibly can. We also need more people to join our movement and to fight for real change and to support legislation at both the local and the state level. In closing, I'd like to thank all those who worked so hard to bring this warrant article before town meeting to meet. Oh, can I have the next slide? I'm sorry.
Okay, if you could then finish up, that would be great.
Last two sentences, thank you. In closing, I would like to thank all of those who worked so hard to bring this warrant article before town meeting to meet a critical deadline. And to town meeting, please join us not only in supporting Driscoll ground source heat pumps tonight, but also in supporting the fight for our future, our children's future, and a better future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. There's a question from Mr. Levy, Mark Levy.
Good evening, Madam Moderator. I had one question in mind when I put it up, the question, but I have another one in mind.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark Levy, Precinct 7.
Thank you.
I'm not either of those people in the photograph. This is regrettably me. The question I want to ask now is how accurate are the predictions of the useful life of the school building? And to order that, I'm going to ask if people can tell me, somebody can tell me what the ages were of the buildings, the school buildings that we've replaced or are in the process of replacing, or will go forward, looking forward will replace. Are they in fact 75 years old on average, or is they 50 years old or 40 years old or an hour and a half old? You know, just give us some sense of what the actual usable life of a building in Brookline for schools has been.
I'm going to make a stab at it and see if Erin Galantine wants to handle this question, or if she thinks that Mr. Bennett or the head of DPW. She's not on? Then Dan Bennett, that was my first term.
Good evening, Dan Bennett, Brookline Building Commissioner. The Driscoll School, I don't have exact, I can take some guesses. The Driscoll School is in the area of about 100 years. The next school that we're going to be doing, renovating or rebuilding is the Pierce School, which was built in 1972 or 73. So that can give some sort of a context on the two buildings that we're doing right now. The high school, we're renovating and doing over. Some buildings on that campus are 100 or more years old. So Brookline does have some, buildings that are older, and we have been able to use them, past the, I think the applicant or the petitioner, said 75 years. With the exception of Pierce, I'm going to say most of our school buildings, exception of the new Lincoln School, are in that ballpark.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call on Representative Tommy Votolo, and I welcome you to our meeting tonight.
Thank you. My name is Tommy Rotolo. I am a town meeting member at large, and I have a question. I suppose the moderator should figure out to whom it might be asked. My question is this: if we could hand an envelope to a bank with $315,000 in it each year for the next 20 years, and the electric company would in turn hand us an envelope with $360,000 in it each year for the next 20 years. And then after that, the electric company keeps handing us envelopes with cash in it once a year. What budget regime could there possibly be that says that's a bad financial deal?
All right, I sort of see that as a rhetorical question, but I am still going to call on Ms. Goff to handle that one.
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. I agree with the sentiment of the question, and I agree that energy efficient projects that have good returns are projects that the town would like to invest in.
Thank you. Mariah Nobrega, you have a question?
Thank you, Mariah Nobrega, Precinct 4. I just wanted to re-emphasize and make sure I understood correctly that in spite of the AC presentation, that the AC vote was actually 24-1 in favor of this warrant article.
Yes,
Could someone,
was.
perhaps the chair? Okay, thank you.
It was. Thank you. Carolyn Thal, you have a question?
Carolyn Thal, Precinct 16. Madam Moderator, I have sort of a cluster of questions. Should I just ask them all at once and you can dole them out as you see fit? They're simple.
I would pare
They're
them
simple
down
and
as
quick.
much as.
They're simple
Okay,
and
simple
quick.
and quick. And if you could speak a little more loudly, that would be
Oh,
great.
sure.
Thank
Is
you.
that any better?
That-
Turn up my volume.
That works for me.
Somebody mentioned the upcoming Pierce project, and I think the number put out was 120 million. My understanding is that current estimates for that are 200 million. And I know we're just getting going with that. I would love if somebody who is on the Pierce Building Committee could tell us with accuracy where that's looking. Likewise, I'd love to hear from somebody who's on the skating rink group. I know Ms. Galantine, it sounds like, isn't here. I'm hearing that that's to restore the Lars Anderson skating rink. That's 20 to 35 million, and I'd love a confirmation of that. And then specific to this, if somebody from the Driscoll Building Committee could just kind of explain a little bit more. The presentations kept using the word restore, that this particular technology, which sounds wonderful, and I wish I could afford all kinds of wonderful green technology. I can't. That this was restored. So my understanding was we had a debt exclusion that was for a $115 million project. And then bids came up high, so there was value engineering. But now this is back. So I'd like to understand the restore part and why we can't do this wonderful technology for the budget that voters approved for this project. In my precinct, this project lost by 4-1. So I sort of have a responsibility to my constituents. Thank you.
Mr. Gashak, I am going to ask you to answer that if you are comfortable doing that. You can also punt it to somebody else if you prefer.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'd be happy to answer the last of my colleague Ms. Thal's questions, and I would have to defer to folks on the building committees and other committees she asked for the others. But with respect to my word restore, I think it's important to remember town meeting voted an appropriation and borrowing authorization for this project back in the fall of 2019 that had a specific dollar amount on it. The voters were not asked to approve a specific dollar amount. They were asked to approve the concept of debt excluding this project as it was framed at the time, which they did by a significant majority. In the course of, as Ms. Thal noted, in the course of then getting bids in on that project, those bids came out as we had spoken a lot about in November 2019, even higher than expected because of the rampant construction cost inflation going on in Eastern Massachusetts right now. And so the building committee, as I understand it, did its best to make quote value engineering end quote changes at that time to stay within the $115.5 million approval from town meeting rather than ask for any more. As part of that, the projections for the savings associated with the ground source heat pumps that were part of the original project were not handled, or let's say were not fully completed, did not have the demand savings incorporated in them that would have shown how quickly they pay themselves back. That work was later done by Mr. Englander primarily, resulting in where we are now. It probably is true that we are actually, even with this project, asking voters or asking taxpayers to pay less in additional taxes than was expected at the time of the vote, because we were using numbers based upon a 4% bonding rate at that point, and we're down much, much lower than that now. But that's the basic story of why it's Restore. It was in the project from the start. I think the hope and the expectation is the Department of Revenue will realize that and allow it to be included in the debt exclusion now. Thank you.
Relating to Pierce School, Ms. Goff, would you like to handle that or hand it off to somebody else? Melissa Goff?
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. I'd like to hand it off to Carol Levin, who provided an update for the advisory committee that was very good.
Ms. Levin? Yeah, Carol Levin. Carol.
Thank you. Carol Levin, AC member at large and also a member of the Pierce School Building Committee. Right now, the estimates, the full project cost estimates are approximately $200 million, whether it's 190 or 200 million. The unknown is what the cost will be to the town after the MSBA reimbursements, what portion of the project they'll be covering. It's approximately 30% of covered costs, but there might be things, or will probably be things in the project that the MSBA will not reimburse us for.
And the skating rink issue. Ms. Goff, I'm going to go back to you to say who the appropriate person is if it's not you. And I will then note that there have been some motions to call the question, which I am going to go to after the answer to this question is given. Melissa Goff.
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. The skating rink is currently not in the CIP, so I do not have a project estimate for that at this time. And I haven't had my CIP meeting with DPW yet, where I would typically get an update on the status of that project.
Okay, thank you very much. I have had several people move to call the question. So we are going to vote on whether or not to call the question. There will be 45 seconds. Again, to be clear, it's been seconded. You will have 45 seconds. We need a 2/3 vote to determine whether or not to go directly now to the vote on whether or not to fund the Driscoll School installation of the point of order. I didn't even see it. Point of order from Mr. Gladstone.
Hi, Scott Gladstone, Precinct 16. Just the usual custom is to read off the people who are waiting to ask questions and make comments before taking the vote.
I never remember that, and I apologize. Maybe by my 10th town meeting, I will do that. All right, the people who are waiting to speak are Valerie Frias, you, Gil Hoy, Jonathan Klein, Lee Selwyn, Scott Ananian, and Andrew Fisher. Oh, I'm sorry. I had my thumb over Mr. Englander, who has a presentation. All right, those are the people who are waiting to speak on this issue. Before we get to them, and thank you for that reminder, Mr. Gladstone, we are going to vote on whether or not to call the question. The voting will begins now. Thank you. Okay, the voting period is over. Is there anyone on the phone? Ms. Duffield?
Yes, Chair Duffield, Precinct 6, I vote yes.
I can't, Ms. Vanderkay?
Judith Vanderkay, Precinct 9, yes.
And was there, I'm sorry, there's some chatter in the background. Named. So who else is on the phone? Oh, that was it. Okay, what is the vote? Oh. Hold. Okay, Carolyn Thal is on the phone. She's okie dokie.
I'm here, Carolyn Thal, Precinct 16, yes.
Okay.
118 yes, 82 no, 11 abstentions.
Okay, the motion fails. Mr. Spritz, what is your point of order? SCH. It's the silent H.
Madam Moderator, my point of order, I was getting that in line before the vote. I wanted to understand what the procedure is going to be if the vote is close, if we're going to adjourn or temporarily adjourn so that we can check our votes beforehand, because we don't have another night.
Oh, unfortunately, there's no way to do that on Zoom. So just look carefully at what button you hit before you do it. My clerk is making, that's the story, right? If you know there's an issue, email Mr. Kaufman at bkaufman@brooklinema.gov to tell him immediately that there has been an issue and maybe it will be possible to remedy it before we adjourn or dissolve. Okay, I am going to go to Mr. Englander.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Slides, please. Thank you. Scott Englander, Precinct 6, good evening. Dave Gashak showed you a chart of monthly electricity costs, and this is the same, but for the whole year. And the huge savings you see here, which make this one-time opportunity at Driscoll pay for itself, are part of what will make our debt exclusion request so compelling to the DOR. The orange is the cost associated with demand. Blue is the cost of energy consumption. Again, most of the money we're saving the town comes from reduced demand charges. So what's demand? The fact that your home electricity bill doesn't have demand charges on it might explain some of the glazed expressions out there. This is a little technical and there will be a quiz, so pay attention. Next slide, please. My young assistant here will help demonstrate. She's standing in a tub and filling it up using a hose. The demand is the flow rate of water through the hose, say 5 gallons a minute, and the consumption is the volume of water that ends up in the tub. Next slide. Here's a chart of the demand and energy used by a large customer. The vertical axis is the average demand for each 15-minute interval, and the horizontal axis is time. This is over a month, and each hump is a day. The area under the curve is the energy consumed in kilowatt hours. You can see that the highest 15-minute demand is 2,500 kilowatts on June 29th at 8 p.m. That's the billing demand. And at our schools, we pay up to $32 per kilowatt. The geothermal system's demand is not only lower than that of the base system, but most of those demand savings you saw in orange happen in the winter. A big reason that next slide, please. A big reason that matters is that in winter, when most of the gas pipeline capacity goes for space heating, peak demands on the region's power system are met by peaking generators burning oil. that's especially polluting. Massachusetts peaking plants are shown on this map, oil-fired in gray, gas-fired in orange. On the right, the diameter of each circle is the population in a 3-mile radius of each plant, showing the proportions that are low income and minority on the vertical and horizontal axes. The largest gray circles are for the Mystic plant in Everett and the M Street Jet in South Boston. I'm sure you won't be surprised that low-income populations and communities of color are most impacted by the toxic emissions of these peaking plants. So investing in a system with a lower peak winter demand will not only save Brookline a lot of money, it will actually reduce the toxic emissions from these plants. Well, with all of the benefits that the petitioners discussed, especially the compelling financial ones, I hope you'll join us in voting yes. And you lucked out, there's no time left for a quiz.
You can send it to everybody on the TMMA listserv. All right, we have a question 2 from Mr. Lee Selwyn. Selwyn, S-E-L-W-Y-N.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Lee Selwyn, Precinct 13. The high school project had a massive override, and I'm doing this from memory, but I think it was well in excess of $30 million. And when that happened, and again, I'm doing this from memory, so if I'm incorrect, please correct me. We went back to DOR for an adjustment in the debt exclusion, and we were allowed to do that, if I recall correctly, one time. So my first question is, if we ask the DOR for a debt exclusion on this 4.9 million, does that then lock us out of a debt exclusion request in the event of another 15 to 20% cost overrun that of the type that we had in the high school? My second question is, we had, when Carol Levin spoke, she talked about the ongoing impact to both the CIP and the town services operating expenses of the debt service associated with the 4.9 million in debt in the event that the DOR does not increase the debt exclusion to accommodate that. And last night we voted about the equivalent of about 1.2 million in annual debt service for the Alston case. And I'm wondering if either Melissa or Carol can describe what the combined impact on ongoing operations of the town and what will have to be cut in order to cover those two items, which would then not be recoverable through a tax increase. And Madam Moderator, I just have one point of order, if you would indulge me, about that's related to this. If we're asking for DOR to increase the debt exclusion, is that going to require a 2/3 vote rather than a 50% vote?
That's not a point of order.
I apologize, but it's still a good question.
The vote requires a point of order because it would be bonded. So a 2/3 vote.
Thank you.
So, okay. We'll go back to Ms. Goff. The first question is whether or not we will be locked out of a debt exclusion, as I understand it, as a result of if this article is passed.
That is correct. We'd only be able to make this ask once.
And the second, as I understand it, was related to the impact to the CIP and town operating expenses if the DOR does not increase our debt exclusion. What will the impact be of the $11 million settlement and the bonding for this?
So the $11 million settlement, I think there still needs to be further discussion about whether or not the impact of that would sit squarely on the CIP or whether or not it would be a combination of operating reductions as well as CIP reductions. In terms of this project specifically, the debt service payment of $360,000 for the next 20 or so years would need to be accommodated. So in terms of fiscal 23, that $360,000 debt service payment would need to be offset with reductions of projects of $360,000. So as an example, you have smaller CIP projects like tree removal and replacement, that's $240,000 item. You have sidewalk, I think Carol already mentioned, was around $380,000. So the smaller cash funded projects would likely be vulnerable in fiscal 23. And then going forward, it would be a combination of bond funded projects and cash projects that would have to be re-examined if this additional authorization would go through.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Valerie Frias.
Thank you, Madam Moderator and members of town meeting. Valerie Frias on behalf of the unanimous school committee. I will be about as brief as Select Board Chair Hamilton. We voted on September 23rd of this year unanimously to support warrant Article 2. The ground source heat pump system both optimizes energy efficiency as well as the project savings over the life of the building. And in answer to an earlier question, Driscoll was dedicated in 1911. I also am the very new Driscoll Building Committee co-chair on the school committee side and want to express that committee support. We're unable to have an official vote due to technical difficulties on the first, but there was general support for the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ananian.
Thank you very much. I can be just as brief in urging support for this project. I think that's all I need to say right now. Thanks.
Mr. Fisher. What? Andrew Fisher, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll try also to be brief. I just wanted to, Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. Friends, your yes vote tonight to include geothermal ground source air pumps as part of the.
We can't hear you, Mr. Fisher. You're being.
Let me speak up.
Yes.
Should I start again?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. First, your yes vote tonight to include geothermal ground source air pumps as part of the new Driscoll School is a vote to move forward and not stay stuck in the past. It's a vote that can make Brookline proud, all of us together. This will be Brookline's first public building to go beyond 100% fossil fuel free by investing in geothermal heating and cooling, using the earth as a source of heating and cooling. We will make significant reductions in our electric power, reduce our independence on the grid, and reduce energy use from the day the new building opens for the life of the school. Hopefully, we're setting a new baseline for the next school and every town building from now on. This is the kind of action that has made Brookline a leader in Massachusetts and the nation, the kind of thing that should make us all feel proud. This is the kind of thing that we can and should be doing together as a town. As you have heard, we have had the good fortune to be able to use the green alternative without paying a cost. Indeed, we will be getting a huge payback in energy savings for the life of the school, 75, perhaps 100 years. The payback is going to be far in excess of the capital investment of adding geothermal air control. Doing the right thing won't always be this easy, but it will always be something all of us in Brookline can proudly do together, which is to lead on climate change. Some people have said some thank yous. I want to say thank you to the Select Board and the Advisory Committee, also to Climate Action Brookline, to the Green Caucus, to PACS, and to everyone else who has endorsed this forward-looking step and joined us in this. And a thank you to each of you for voting yes on Article 2. Let's show that we can do together for Brookline, for our children, and for our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kelly Hardebeck. You have a question?
Yes, Kelly Hardebeck, Precinct 7. My question is about the comparative efficiency between the two systems. So we've heard a lot about the cost differences between the system that's currently approved that was instituted through the value engineering of the project and this system. I'd like to understand what we're gaining in terms of efficiency by voting this particular system.
I'd like to call on our new sustainability director, Tom Barroso, if I'm getting that correctly, and see if you would like to tackle that question. He's not here. All right, Melissa, do you want to tackle that question? Melissa Goff?
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. I believe there are members of the project team that would better be able to answer this question. Jennifer Carlson or Tony Quigley are also on this call, and they can also refer to other team members that are on this call.
I'm not quite sure what that means, but Jennifer Carlson, can you answer this or tell us who can? Oh, Scott Englander, are you able to answer this question about the comparative efficiency between the system contemplated now and the one we are voting on?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Well, as you can see about that the system uses about 25 to 30% less energy than the air source heat pump system would. And a lot of that is because of the energy used by the supplemental electric boiler in the air source system on the very coldest days, which is the system does not have a supplemental boiler. It has one for emergency use only.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Hardebeck, or?
I have returned. I'm sorry, this is Jennifer Carlson from Left Field. I am here. I would say that Dom Cuniello, sorry if I butchered your name, Dom, from GGD would be a good person to answer this question.
Okay, Ms.
Hello, I would echo. Hello, Dominic Pinello with Garcia Gillespie D'Souza Engineers. I would echo the last statement. In the range of 25, 30% more efficient.
Okay. I'm going to let's see, there's been another call for the question. So I'm going to allow one more question by Sasan Zelka. Oh, okay. The question is, does this qualify for government subsidies such as Mass Save? Ms. Goff?
I don't know specifically whether or not that would be eligible for Mass Save grant program, but I believe that the project is going to be seeking all the grants that they can apply for that would be eligible. So I think they're going to explore those options as well.
Thank you. All right. There's been another motion to call the question. Again, we will need a 2/3 vote. The people who are waiting are Scott Gladstone, who has Gil Hoy, Jonathan Klein, Naomi Schweitzer, Jim Franco, Ryan Black, Mark Lowenstein, Carolyn Thal, Laura Baines Walsh, and that is it. So those are the people who are waiting. Let me know when you're ready to drop the vote. We need 2/3 again. Not ready yet? Get your fingers ready so you vote the way you want to. Okay, we're going to start now. 45 seconds. before we go to the people on the phone, I want to let everyone know that if you need to correct your vote, you need to contact Mr. Kaufman before we adjourn. Okay, who have we got on the phone first? Ms. Duffield. Ms. Duffield?
Oh, sorry, Chair Duffield, precinct 6, yes.
Ms. Van. Oh, Carolyn Thal, how do you vote?
I vote no.
Ms. Vanderkay, how do you vote?
Vanderkay, precinct 9, yes.
Okay. We have 181 yes, 31 no, 8 abstentions.
The vote is 181 to terminate debate, 31 not to, 8 abstentions. The motion passes. We will now go to vote on Article 2. And in case anyone forgot, Article 2 is a motion to fund $4.9 million of installation of a ground source heat pump for Driscoll School. Okay, the question will drop now. 2/3 majority required.
Congratulations.
Okay, the voting time is over. We will now go to our friends on the phone. Ms. Duffield.
Chair Duffield,
Yeah.
precinct 6, yes.
Ms. Thal. Okay, you need to unmute yourself, Ms. Thal. Oh, okay, there you are. What's your vote?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My vote is no.
Ms. Vanderkay.
Vanderkay, precinct 9, yes.
We have 196 yes, 16 no, 5 abstentions.
Okay, even I can do the math on this one. We have 196 yes, 16 no's, and 5 abstentions. The motion passes. I will now take a motion to dissolve. If somebody would like to move, so move, and second. Mike Salmon moves. We just need a second. I can stay here all night. Stephanie Greenfield, thank you for seconding. Ready for the vote? Okay, majority vote this time. Okay, the time for voting is up. You have about 10 seconds to correct your vote while we get our votes on the phone before the opportunity is gone. We will call on Ms. Duffield for her vote.
Chair Duffield, yes.
Ms. Vanderkay,
Vanderkay, precinct 9, yes.
and what are the numbers?
190 yes, 6 no, 3 abstentions.
I appreciate the loyalty of the 6 people who voted not to dissolve, but 190 people voted to dissolve, with 3 abstaining. Therefore, this hearing or this session is dissolved, and I will see you all in about 5 weeks.